So, your book talks about the different theories on social stratification. Some is based on functionalism perspective. Some is based on conflict theory. Some is based on symbolic interactionism. And your book also talks about this famous Davies-Moore hypothesis, or some called it the Davies-Moore theory. And according to the Davies-Moore hypothesis or theory, the job function determines our compensation. This is how stratification works. According to Dr. Davies and Dr. Moore, they both created a hypothesis or a theory. So according to Davies and Moore, when they created this hypothesis or theory, they claimed that our salary in society depends on the importance of our job, the value of our jobs to society. That's why I asked you this question. So, is the Davies-Moore theory true in society, or we need to modify the theory, or it's completely useless? So, let's talk about other jobs. Athletes, those who go pro, if they are good, they get compensated really well. Comedians, if they are good in what they do, they can make people happy. They are compensated really well. So, are the job functions of comedians and athletes most important in any society? So, is the theory useful, or it needs modification, or is completely useless? Go figure. This is what we mean by Davies-Moore theory. Our salary, our compensation is based on our job functions and value of our tasks. This is how we are being stratified. Firefighters, military personnel, law enforcement officers, social workers, ministers. Are they below athletes and comedians? They have a stable salary with benefits, maybe good benefits. People in the Navy, people in the military. So, are they somewhat less important than comedians and athletes? Movie stars. So maybe it tells us that this hypothesis needs some modification. It's not perfect. Are we clear? That's why I asked you this question. To think about this hypothesis, to think about what you learned in class. Okay. So, Karl Marx is based on conflict theory. Davies-Moore hypothesis is based on notions from functionalism. You see, it says job function determines our salary. And Karl Marx has a different view of social stratification. And he created his theory hundreds of years ago during Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So Karl Marx claimed that social class is determined by ownership of means of production. And those who own the buildings, the assets, the factories, are the bourgeoisie, the higher class, compared to those who did not own anything, who work for all these factory owners, the proletariats. So, initially, the social class system created by Marx had only two categories, and later on, theorists or researchers who extended upon Marx's classification of social class, they created more categories. And conflict theory has more utility, it seems. Many researchers, many theories, they extended upon Marx's original theory on stratification to focus on criminal justice, on health, on other aspects of life. They have more social classes in between. And I'm a medical sociologist, so a lot of the theories I learned in grad school, or a lot of the theories I'm exposed to even now for my research, they extract certain ideas from the conflict theory, like the cumulative advantage or cumulative disadvantage hypothesis. It says that people's advantages or people's disadvantageous positions in society are accumulating over life. If you are born in a poor neighborhood, you go to certain schools, and that neighborhood had poor sewage system, poor water quality. That neighborhood is also high crime, very polluted. These disadvantages is going to accumulate from childhood to teenage years to adulthood to old age. This is what we mean by the cumulative advantage or disadvantage theory. Depends on which group of people we are focusing on. If you are from a high-class neighborhood, the same thing. Your advantageous position is going to accumulate over time to the point that it's going to affect your education, occupation, health, and other outcomes. So, these are extensions from the conflict theory. And an ex-con is already at an disadvantaged position. Maybe society is still not willing to give that person a second chance, even though that person paid his due in prison. And because of that, that person finds it very challenging to get a decent job after being released from prison. There are some theories from crime that are based on elements of the conflict theory. And because of that, it further widens the socio-economic disparities between non-convicts, people who has never been to prison, and ex-con. So, conflict theory has been extended by many researchers into different domains compared to the functionalist theory. Okay, so symbolic interactionism is a bottom-up approach. So because of that, they view stratification from a bottom-up approach. Functionalism and conflict theory are top-down approach, are macro theories. We've been through this many times. So, proponents of symbolic interactionism theory, when they talk about when they talk about stratification, they focus on interaction within the same social class groups or interaction among people across social class. Interaction from people within the same neighborhood, same social class, they may come to the conclusion that being on welfare, being on food stamps is bad. These people are not trying hard enough. These people are not putting enough effort. These people are not motivated to get another job. They may view people on welfare, on food stamps, in a given light. And because they interact with others within the same neighborhood, others who are like them, who has or who have the same occupation, who have almost the same education, and who have white collar jobs. People in inner cities, poor neighborhoods, when they interact within themselves, they may think that, we don't really want to be on food stamps or welfare or disability, but we cannot help it. It's due to things beyond our control. So, they try to understand the processes of stratification by interacting among themselves, even though they may not be aware that they are touching on topics related to social stratification when they discuss this issue. Are we clear? And we talked about class markers last week. Class markers are our cultural capital, our know-how, the language we use to convey our thoughts, how we dress, our taste of wine, our taste of magazines, books, movies. These are all cultural capital, and people from the same social class, they tend to have the same sets of cultural capital or class markers. They think, talk, walk the same, dress the same. So, because of that, they are going to hang out with people like them. This is another way of how proponents of symbolic interactionism theory views social stratification. We can try to gauge another person's social class through their class markers or cultural capital, by the way they talk, they dress, by their taste of books, magazines, movies, wine, and so on and so forth. We can quite likely figure out the person's social class or social standing and their consumption habits. Through all these things, we can also figure out their social class standing, right? This is how symbolic interactionism theory views stratification. Are we clear? So, sometimes I don't know if you notice the media, TV, internet, other avenues. From my days, it was this way. In your days, it's still this way. I don't know if you notice that. The media portrays the poor and the rich in different light. If you watch different channels, sometimes they do that. They portray the poor in this manner: welfare cheats, drug addicts, greedy, a nuisance, panhandlers, annoyance to people's store if they linger around those places, as a resistance to the community because of their presence. Sometimes they portray the poor as unfortunate or temporary. They may portray their circumstances as temporary sometimes, but regardless, whether they portray all these things as permanent or temporary, the poor sometimes are not being portrayed in a positive light by the media. They are being portrayed as dependent on government assistance, on welfare and whatnot, on handouts. And yeah, sometimes they portray the poor in soup kitchens. They portray the poor through the lens of the middle and upper class. They portray the poor as recipients of different charities like the youth time. And they say the poor, the way they portray the poor in news, through other means, they portray that the poor are responsible for their plight. But sometimes we know the poor are the way they are is because factors beyond their control. But this is sometimes not how the media portrays them. And they portray the poor as promiscuous single mothers, usually women. They bear the brunt of all these things, all these images, negative images. And they also portray the poor as drug users or drug dealers. Most of them or all of them are negative. And I don't know if you notice, more than 70%, I think according to estimates a few years ago by international organization, I forgot whether it is World Bank or UN or some other international organizations, that estimates say that more than 70% of the population globally are living in poverty. But when we turn on the TV, how many channels cater to the rich? Channels about stock markets, weather, and sports. This topic may not have a lot of relevance for the issues, the challenges faced by the poor. This is how the media portrays the rich through international trade, through their impact on the business climate, their business savviness, through other society pages and gossip. This is somewhat a negative light sometimes. Sometimes the media portray the rich as generous through these events, as the contributors of soup kitchens and charities. They portray the rich as benevolent, generous. They portray the poor as recipients of these events. And sometimes they portray the rich as having special expertise or knowledge or talents. And sometimes they portray the rich as the victims of the poor. When the poor lingers around their store, when the poor are being annoying by lingering around their store. Any questions so far? If not, let's go to another topic. It's not a bad idea to be ahead. School is closing. Okay, if you go to the PDF file on Canvas, week 10 module that say global inequality, you can watch from the board or from your gadget. It doesn't matter. So now let's talk about global inequality. Stratification is not limited to a given country. And if you go to your free book, ebook on Canvas, we know that the global stratification system or any stratification system are socially constructed. Different countries are classified into different categories, as you can see from here, based on their GDP, GNP, and other relevant measures. They are being classified as first world, second world, third world, and fourth world countries. Fourth world countries, according to your book, would be countries with marginalized minorities. And another group of people also classify these countries as the core nations, which corresponds to the first world country. These are the developed, industrialized, urbanized, capitalist countries and democracies countries. These are the core nations of the first world countries. And another group of people, they classify another group of countries as semi-peripheral countries. These are the second and third world countries. They lump these two, if you look at the definition from your book, into the semi-peripheral countries. These are the countries which are limited or moderately developed, limited in development, or they have moderate economies. They are in between the developed nations and the third world nations, the second world. And third world countries would be the underdeveloped nations. They lump these two under semi-peripheral countries. They equate second world countries with semi-peripheral countries. I'm sorry, I don't see it carefully. And they lump third and fourth world countries into peripheral countries. Okay, so with coronavirus these days, we see that sometimes first world country may not be that of an advantage or may not be that better off with coronavirus. Depends on how able they are to export the mass or to produce the mass themselves. First world country may not be as beneficial or advantageous sometimes when something strikes, like the coronavirus. If the first world country, they move all their manufacturing plants to other country, initially to save costs. And if the existing factory bases in those countries cannot produce mass soap, protective equipments, and other things within a short frame of time, they may face a lot of challenges, not only healthcare. So these are the challenge faced when countries are transitioning from industrialized to post-industrialized nation statuses. Are we clear? And when countries transition from industrialized to post-industrialized nations, like the US, many countries in Europe, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan. And some of these countries, they move their factories abroad to cut costs. And when this transition happened, they meant to be capital flight from one place to another, from one continent to another. And this is going to lead to deindustrialization when all these countries, when they gain the status of post-industrialized country, they are going to face something called deindustrialization. They may not have a lot of factories remain, and because of that, they face certain challenges when something strikes, like now the coronavirus. And it's going to affect their abilities to cope with natural and man-made disasters. So, I saw a YouTube channel, and the organization of that channel, she gathered experts from different domains, MDs. That's a Taiwanese YouTube channel. She gathered medical doctors, public health experts, financial experts, other experts to her panel. I think you know what I'm talking about. And all these experts, through their discussion, some of them claim that Taiwan is covered for coronavirus. Don't quote me on this. I'm basing my opinion from what I saw on YouTube. This panel from that channel claim that they are still manufacturing plants in Taiwan. And Taiwan, if the case remains stable, they can produce enough mass for the public needs, the needs of the Taiwanese. They are fine, not like other countries, where they have to import from some developing countries, and that country may need their supplies for their own use. They cannot export at this time, and sometimes this country may be in trouble. But it's hard to say, in my humble opinion. Nowadays, with robotization, automation, maybe the use of robots or automation, who knows, can work overtime, can extend factory hours. We never know for sure now. We don't have official estimates at this stage. And it's hard to tell for sure. Maybe they can produce all these things in time to cater for the needs of the medical professionals and the general public. It's hard to tell in this stage. And if you go to this small table, this is how the occupational structure in the US changed over time. And if you scroll all the way to manufacturing sector, I think they decline drastically. In fact, yeah, we see a decline in cleaning, maintenance, and repair sectors. So this shows that the US economy has transitioned from an industrialized economy to a knowledge-based economy. There's an increase in management-related jobs, administrative, administrative jobs from 19th century until now. There's an increase in service occupations in healthcare. But there's a decline in cleaning, maintenance, and repair. And your book also talks about feminization of poverty. It's a global problem. And feminization of poverty is a phenomenon where women bear the brunt of the consequences associated with living in poverty. They live in subpar living conditions. They have inadequate access to healthcare. They experience food insecurity and malnutrition. And they don't have clean water. Sometimes we've been through this before. Different dimensions of inequality interacts and intersects to affect a person's outcomes. It can be education outcome, occupation outcome, health outcomes, other outcomes. So, when women are exposed to all these conditions, it's going to cause some kind of gender-based inequality. And with coronavirus, I think it makes it worse. With or without coronavirus, it's going to lead to treatment or diagnosis disparities between men and women, or within women from different social classes. Any questions so far?